All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us today on this first day of summer. My name is Robert Haw, and I've come to Passive House after a long career at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I now work as a Passive House consultant when I'm not volunteering for Climate Action California. Today's webinar topic is Passive House, what is it and why is it important? So if you have any questions during the presentation, please drop them into the chat box and we'll answer them after the presentation. There should be lots of time for Q&A. Megan Shumway, up here on the giving you a wave, she's our question curator, and she'll bring them up in the order that they were received. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Okay, I hope everybody can see that. So there's the title page. Passive House, what is it and why is it important? Okay, so here's California's greenhouse emissions as of 2021. It shows all the proportion where the greenhouse gases are coming from under this pie chart. And down here in the right corner is the contribution from the built sector buildings, commercial and residential buildings. And this is just from heating, cooking, and drying, not electricity. So that's just the official proportion based on measured consumption, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. So because gas leaks in natural gas distribution systems are widespread, leaks everywhere. In 2016, a JPL colleague discovered these leaks in Pasadena with a newly discovered gas sniffer device. Since then, leaks like this have been found in cities all across America. And you know, it goes all the way back to the fracking fields. So these leaks consist mostly of methane, as you're probably aware, the primary component of natural gas. And methane is a supervillain greenhouse gas. Methane's global warming potential is 84 times greater than that of carbon dioxide over the time frame of concern to us. Methane in the atmosphere is concerning because, as this recent spike up here shows, its concentration is increasing rapidly. Okay, this is the only graph I'm going to show, but why this is important is you can see this is 802,021 years of here. And you can see that for almost all of that time, the levels of methane in the atmosphere, they went up and down. It doesn't really matter what they were, but they were pretty stable. There was no general trend. And then over the last 150 years, it's all compressed into this line here, there's been this steady rise. Now, over this roughly the same time period, carbon dioxide's concentration has increased around 1.5 times. But methane has increased 3 times. So that means there's twice as much impact now from methane as there used to be, just based on concentration. But of course, it's 84 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So other calculations, other people have made estimates, and the 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit warming that has happened to date from the pre-industrial era, the estimate is around half of that is due to methane. And that's a real risk because it can lead to unexpected feedback loops. Positive feedback loops can destabilize climate systems, where one bad condition reinforces another over and over. For example, the melting of the permafrost in the Arctic, which releases even more methane. Sometimes that's referred to as a vicious cycle. And this is where passive house can help. Have you heard of the Icebox Challenge? This is where a competition is set up with two boxes are built, static boxes, perhaps they have windows in them. One box is built to code, the building code, and one box is built like a passive house, but there's no other mechanical equipment or anything. They're just a static passive box. And the idea is you take 1,800 pounds of ice and you load them into those boxes. And this is done in the spring, late spring or summer. And you seal them up and you wait a month. And so the challenge is to determine how much ice will remain in each box. Either the two boxes, the building code standard and the passive house standard. And these are representative numbers. It differs a little bit each time, but in this case, usually it's around 6 or 7 times more ice remains in the passive house box than in the building code standard. And this works on full-size buildings too. Passive house slashes utility bills by 50% in California, more in other states that don't have such advanced standards already as California's code does. It also increases the quiet and comfort inside your home and makes it smoke tight. Passive house does all that and costs less than 5% extra to build. It does that by super insulating the walls and the roof and installing high performance windows, eliminating drafts that steal your hot and cool, installing smart ventilation, which provides clean, allergen-free air. And then all of this contributes to a low cost of operations of that building. So, can you find the passive house? This is an infrared photograph, and so heat shows up here as red or orange color. And you can see that the passive house is starkly differs from its neighbors. It's the blue house with where the arrow is pointing to. All the other units have a lot of heat escaping from them. The passive house has been thermally insulated and does a really good job at keeping heat inside the dwelling. So passive house design keeps you warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Thick walls block energy waste and block outside noise. A smart device brings in fresh air, filters it, and keeps warmth and coolness in the house. And then the house is designed to the extent possible to keep, to admit sun in the winter, to keep the house warm, to warm the house up, and to keep as much sun as possible out in the winter, or in the summer. So sunshine in the winter, none in the summer. And that leads to superior performance of the building. But a passive house does more. It reduces greenhouse gases and helps fulfill climate targets. As I mentioned, it uses a lot less energy, and that leads to smaller peak loads. And peak loads are what occur during, say, the dinner time hour when everybody's turning on all their ovens and everybody's arriving back home. And that leads to more energy needing to be generated by the utility company. And generally to fill that gap with that extra energy, they have to build peaker plants. These are generation plants that are just used during those peak hours. But to this day, most of those plants, those energy generators, are powered with natural gas. That's slowly changing, but there are still there's still pressure to build those and run them on natural gas, and we want to reduce that necessity. It's much easier to electrify a passive house. In fact, it's just uneconomical to run a gas line into a new home, a passive home, because it just won't need the needs of a gas in the house. And that's the way we will retire gas lines in the city for at least new building infrastructure. There's increased resilience in a passive house. So if the power goes out, the thermal equilibrium in the house will be maintained much longer than in a code-built house, measured in days instead of hours. Or if you have a house backup battery system, it's going to be much easier to maintain power in the house for much longer if it's a passive house than a code-built house. And a passive house is better for health. You have much higher indoor air quality. As I mentioned, far fewer allergens. So passive house simplifies, yet increases comfort and saves money. So projections are that there will be a lot more new floor space needed by, in this case, 2040, but there are projections going out to 2050 and 2060. In this case, it's almost half what of already the existing floor space as of in 2021. So all of that new floor space will increase electricity demand. In fact, electricity demand is expected to double or even triple by 2045. And that's going to introduce a massive strain on the transmission grid. It's going to also strain our plans to transition to zero carbon power because you're going to need just that many more solar farms out in the desert and wind farms. All electric passive houses can significantly reduce demand, and that will ease strain on the grid. There's no way we can achieve our climate goals without using all our available tools. And one of those tools is more efficiency, and passive house offers that in spades. So if someone wanted to build a new house and build it to code and to electrify the house, they would probably incorporate a heat pump as part of that electrification. Now, if you were to build that same house to the extent possible, keeping it the same, but to passive house standard, it would require only 1/3 to 1/2 the code-built heat pump, size of the heat pump. So that's beneficial for lowering utility costs, but also the size of the heat pump will have a smaller loading of refrigerant. That's the working fluid that's both in heat pumps and in your refrigerator. So those will tend to leak over time, not very much at all. But the global warming potential of that refrigerant liquid is measured in 2,000 times that of carbon dioxide. So the smaller the loading you have in your heat pump, the less influence there will be on climate from those leaks. Here's an example of a fire hall, a new fire station that was built to passive house standard. And the client wanted to really do the best they could in efficiency. So rather than installing air source heat pumps, they decided to install ground source heat pumps. That means they had to drill boreholes. This building requires 12 boreholes. Now, if this was built to code minimum, it would have required 70 boreholes to heat and cool that building. So just another example of the enormous efficiencies that passive houses bring. Here are some photographs of passive houses around the country. And another key efficiency of passive house is simple geometry. Passive houses reduce the number of corners and edges in buildings, and heat can leak out or leak in through those edges. It also reduces surface area of the building to the extent possible for the given design. Now, what about cost? The cost for a single family residence, as has been reported, is up to 5% higher, maybe around that region. And that's mostly due to the high-performance windows. And that extra expense can be recouped within several years. But right now, costs for multi-unit residential passive house buildings are on par with legacy construction costs. So right now, you can build a passive house multi-unit building and receive all of those passive house benefits for roughly the same cost. And this is an opportunity for a superb low-income housing projects. Think of these projects built next to freeways. The residents in there will benefit from those amenities. There'll be less outside noise. There'll be less PM 2.5 particulate pollution coming in into their units. And in particular, low-income people spend a disproportionate amount of their income on energy costs. And if we can lower their utility bills significantly, that goes a long ways for these folks. And with experience in general, construction costs come way down. And that's been demonstrated in jurisdictions around the world that are far ahead of California with passive house construction. So prefabrication can bring costs down. You can take those those wall assemblies and just crane them into place. There are over 80,000 passive house buildings built worldwide. Washington, Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, Denver are leading proponents in the US. So if we're going to do this, let's get it right, because buildings last a long time. So California's building code has history. It's been around for 115 years. It's tried to keep up with the times. It has respectable performance, but it is mostly a list of prescriptive steps. Each step of the way has a prescription of how to achieve that. On the other hand, passive houses, they are performance-based. They are just looking at the end result and does it achieve this very high, very efficient thermal standard. So this standard was developed with this in mind 35 years ago by German physicists. It's top-notch, all-encompassing, and rigorous. In my view, it's the best at-scale method we have for future-proofing homes. So there's no way to achieve climate goals without using all our available tools. So the current situation is that California's code does not require smoke-tight buildings. It does not include heat leakage criteria, and it has no comfort criteria for the occupants. Passive House includes all of that in its certification. Now, first adopter Passive House developers, they need to satisfy both California's code and Passive House standards. Now, that's not an insurmountable set of steps, but it's one more obstacle. It adds a little more expense. And so it handicaps adoption of the Passive House standard. And so here's a modest proposal by Climate Action California. Just draw your attention to the bottom half here. The proposal is to implement Passive House in Title 24. It can be introduced legislatively as an optional alternative compliance pathway, facilitating an aggressive climate-aware REACH code. As I mentioned, it's one strategy for opening the way to future-proofed low-income housing. So the proposed legislation would apply to new construction only. There would be voluntary compliance only, but this prepares the way for future adoption of Passive House as a mandatory standard. And this legislation expects no financial support from the state. But there is non-programmatic funding available. The investor-owned utilities, SoCal Edison, PG&E, they are offering money now with new programs. They're just a couple of months old. So offering money for Passive House construction, both in single-family home and multi-residential blocks. SCE actually has a program where they'll offer up to $30,000 for a passive house construction. And then there's federal money also available through the Inflation Reduction Act, up to $14,000 for passive house components such as insulation, air tightness parts, and Energy Star appliances. If you're just curious about how could this, happen, how could this get implemented, this is just a demonstration that something like this is already in place. The Senator Nancy Skinner has introduced a bill. The details differ a lot because this has to do with low carbon concrete, but it's a similar purpose. It's adding a new section to existing legislation to address the climate crisis. No other changes to that existing legislation. It's the same kind of ask in the proposed passive house legislation. So this is a call to action. We are forming a partner coalition. Please join us in our effort to get Title 24 revised. Support the campaign to add passive house to California's building code. Join our coalition to make this happen. And here's a website that you can go to sign on. And just to wrap up, I just want to point out the passive house has a focus on the occupants. It's about making the house comfortable and affordable for the dwellers inside there, lowering their utility bills. But if you combine that with low embodied carbon materials in the construction of that house, you electrify everything, and then you power the house with clean energy, then you've achieved really significant climate action. So this is a page with more information links. And that's the end of my presentation. So if there's any questions, please raise them, or maybe Megan can bring them up from the chat.
The main question people are asking are, will the slides be available after the presentation?
Yes, they will. And we are recording this webinar, so that will be available also. So there's a question here. I see a question here. It says, do you build passive houses? Well, I don't build a passive house, but I do offer the passive house energy modeling expertise. So I work in collaboration with architects, so I see another question here. What are current steps to present to the legislature? Well, we are currently, right now, we have just been trying to build our coalition. That has been coming along quite nicely. We have 50 organizations and groups now in the coalition. Those are listed on our website. And so what we're about to embark upon is actually reaching out to offices of legislators that we think from our previous business with these legislators might be interested in carrying this bill. So we do have draft legislation available, a legislative brief that they can start from. And so we are ready to begin that stage of this campaign. So does anybody want to ask their question orally? We can unmute the audience.
Rob, I have a question.
Yes.
This is Elise. Are there any supply chain constraints for some of this forward-looking material, like the windows and the insulation and the building component?
Well, there's not a supply chain issue right now, no more than any other building component right now. So there are suppliers that make those windows, high performance windows. They're not here in Southern California. We're not in such a bind that we need super. Can I just use the term super high performance windows? Uh, so there's quite a few. There's quite a lot of stock, I think, for what would be necessary, what would be needed in Southern California. But what has happened in these other jurisdictions I mentioned, and these are these are countries in Europe, in Canada, in Australia, New Zealand. When there's a need or when there's a requirement or when there's it's in code, when there's code that this standard is going to be expected of new buildings, lots of businesses pop up that create the required new components, Windows being one in particular.
Looks like Lauren has her hand up.
Okay,
Yeah, can I just go ahead and ask my question?
go ahead. Yes,
Sure.
I don't see you.
I currently have a garage in Pasadena that I want to convert to an ADU. It's in good condition, but clearly not a passive house. Is that possible for me to convert it to one?
Yes, and I think there's an answer also in the chat. You may want to look at that. Steve Mann has provided an answer to that, but yeah, the short answer is absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
And Rob, looks like another question is, do you build solar passive houses?
Well, the short answer is yes. I think what you mean, do you mean there used to be something called a solar passive design in the past. This is a little different than that, but you certainly can put a solar roof on a passive house, of course. If does that answer your question?
Wondering if that's the question you were asking. Was it David?
So there's one here from, well, mention it. David?
Oh, that was from Merrill, but.
Well, here's one I see. Is there any from Ben? Is there any expectation on the total increase in housing prices associated with including passive house in the building standards? I know you mentioned 5%, but far lower utility costs and improved. So by total increase, I think you mean operations probably, and as well as the construction cost. The data, and it's pretty sparse in California because we don't have this standard here, is that there is that premium up front on the order of 5% for single family homes. But and then that will be recouped over a number of years, probably on the order, and it of course it depends on energy costs, right? 7, 8, 10 years perhaps. But that's changing all the time. What we do know, I mentioned, is for the larger buildings, those are pretty much cost effective right away to build because it's a matter of scale. And when you just design it from the ground up with passive house in mind, you don't have any go backs. And so you can just go forward with the entire design and it's cost effective right away.
And Tanisha, are you up for coming off of mute and asking your question?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I know it's kind of long and it's a lot harder when it's in chat. So the question I have is, first of all, I appreciate all the information. I think it's amazing. Definitely want to help with the movement. But a lot of the work that I do is based in communities of concern and particularly like redlined areas. And so even with the reach codes, the problem we're having is that a lot of the communities of concern in areas aren't having new construction. So the reach codes really weren't being put into the spaces there. And I know that this also is including into new construction. So when communities of concern are kind of being left out, how do you see equity coming into these spaces?
Equity into the new construction space?
No, into spaces that, so one of the things you mentioned on part of the slide was caring like about low income residents and how that might, look forward, which I thought was a great point, but then it kept going and it was only for new construction. So when communities of concern don't have new construction, right, how do they actually get to be a part of this movement? And that way they're also, in part of the discussion.
Yes, yes. So you're asking how can we existing houses, how can they be upgraded in this way? Houses that are already here, like, can we involve them? So that is a very topical question. Most of the buildings around us are still going to be existing, right? I mean, new ones coming online. It's still being worked out, right? Right now, it's not cost effective to do one of these passive house kind of upgrades on an existing house if you want to do it for that reason and that reason only, and then say, oh, what's the return on that? Other countries that I mentioned, they are providing more government support, more financial support for existing dwellings to upgrade them. We don't have that kind of level of support yet here in the U.S. or in California. So the short answer is it's not cost effective right now. Does that get to your point? We're hoping to build the industry, build familiarity by starting with the new buildings. And then as everybody gets experience, maybe the industry overall will be able to retroactively apply it more effectively. But it is definitely a foggy situation where we're kind of groping our way ahead. It's something we have to do, but there's no well-defined line right now or path to follow for the existing buildings. There's a standard to meet, but that standard is, as I said, it's not cost effective for the average person to apply that to their homes.
Definitely appreciate and understand it. And I don't know how familiar if you're in San Diego or those that are, we had, the flooding not too long ago, and I mean flooding of almost to roofs where people having to be saved, right? So there are a lot of people in the community are having to figure out how to get the new floors, pulling out the walls so there's not mold. I mean, kind of having to rebuild, quote unquote. So it's not new construction, but I was wondering if there's a space for them to be able to put those walls in now if they had to pull the walls down anyways, and kind of get into that. But if you're saying,
well, so that's a very interesting question. I'd really like to get into depth with you on that. I probably can't do that right now, but can I? If I drop my my email in the chat, could you maybe drop me, pick that up and we could communicate more?
Yes, sir. And I'll put my email as well underneath my question so you know it was me.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Rob, we had another question from David about are there resources for county or city governments that may want to adopt passive house building codes?
Well, there's no resources at the current time other than what would come from the county. But let me describe, let me just tell you this. It's not quite an answer at the county level, but I mentioned that we're not expecting any state support because there's, budget woes in Sacramento. But what has been done in other jurisdictions other countries is there's a cost, there's a fee associated with it's just a permitting fee, right? With and you're allowed a certain square footage percentage of your lot size. Let's say this is for whatever the land side is, you have a certain percentage that you're allowed to build the structure on. Now, if those what has happened in these other countries is they have said, okay, if you're going to build passive house, then we will give you a bigger percentage of the land area that you can occupy. And just as a quick example, this is for a house. We're talking about a single house, a single family house. The area that would be granted to them would be an extra bedroom. So they would be allowed to build. So it would be the same permitting fee, but they would be allowed to build a bigger house, on that lot than they would otherwise. So perhaps a reach code in a city could do the same thing, or a county. And that has had, and you may wonder, well, okay, was that effective? And yes, it has been effective. There are cities that have done this, and it's been very effective. I mean, Brussels is one in Europe. Another one is Vancouver in British Columbia. It had one passive house in 2014. It had one passive house on the planning, in their planning department that was going to be built, and they passed this increased area ordinance. And in 2018, they had something like 2,800 passive houses being planned. So it really works. I see a lot here. I don't know if I'm keeping up with these questions.
Rob, Caitlin Clark asked about becoming a certified passive house designer. She's an architect, or he's an architect.
Well, is the answer, can you? The answer is yes. And you should just check out some of the websites in the link, or maybe we can put some websites here in the chat. As far as contact, as far as there are organizations that offer the training courses. So the answer is yes, and I can put some in here into the chat. I'm sorry, I don't know who that was who asked that question, but there are 3 organizations that you could check out. Well, 2 organizations, and one is sort of has a lot of a meta organization. Okay, let's see. There's any other questions here? There's
one other from early on from Avalon was, what's the largest pushback to this, and how do we counteract the arguments from the other side?
Well, the pushback has been that so up to this point, to my knowledge, previous efforts to get passive house rolling in California have gone through the regulatory agencies, have gone to the California Energy Commission, and they've been asked to, because they're the ones responsible for the building code, for updating the building code, and they've been asked, well, come on, can you add passive house? And they have not, because they're not required to by legislation. So all they do is they follow what's in the law. And so that's why this push is, we're trying to do it differently this time. We are trying to put this into the law so that the regulatory agencies will say, oh, well, look at that, there it is. Now we can implement this into the building code. So that is one pushback, and the other pushback has been, which is more anticipatory, I think, on our part, is that the conservatism of the building industry in general would not want massive changes to occur. So that's why we're forwarding this or proposing this at this time just to be an alternative, an optional alternative method of building, so that it's not going to stop anybody from doing what they were doing in the past. That will have to change in the coming years, but this is a way to, we hope, build familiarity in the industry with it and to show that it's, hey, this is a good thing, not something to fear.
So Debbie is asking about passive house tradespeople in the San Diego area.
There are training programs for these, for passive house trainers. One of them is there is a company called, I don't know about specifically about the tradespeople in San Diego, but I am going to drop something here in the chat. Okay, here is you could talk to this people, or this company. It's called EMU, E-E-M-U, like the bird with a long neck. They are a company that pretty much does nothing but train tradespeople. Okay, they have and they go around the country and they offer training courses. And so this is not a training course, what I dropped in the chat. It is just a link to one of their information sessions. So they have a free information session. It's once a month on the first Thursday of each month. So you could connect with them and perhaps ask them if they've done any past workshops or training sessions in San Diego and they might know of some tradespeople there. Oh, and so Debbie is saying, okay, so EMU has a link to passive house tradespeople on a map, so that's good to know. There's a question here from Bill. Can passive house be built that doesn't need additional heating, cooling at all, whether from externally powered equipment or from on-site clean energy, at least in certain locations of climate? Yes, the answer to your question is yes. So there's passive house research going on now, or the Passive House Institute. They're actually so as I said, this was 35 years ago when this standard first came up. They are actually working now on an Uber passive house, trying to develop a standard for much lower energy, better efficiency, right? Less need for energy input. That it'll never be zero. Well, it could be zero in the northern latitudes. Okay, so there's an asymmetry here between passive houses located in the northern latitudes, like say Maine and in Southern California, because it's the so body heat works to your benefit in a northern latitude, and you could make the house so efficient that you could just turn on an old style incandescent light bulb and your own your body, and you could warm the building up. Of course, it would take a while, so you may not be that patient, but that would be sufficient to trap the heat. But in Southern California, we have the opposite problem, is that the occupants and all the activities, cooking and things, in the summertime, that's generating heat inside when it's hot outside. And so we do need mechanical cooling almost in most situations in Southern California. Not if you design it, not if you're near the coast and you have good breezes. But I'm just talking about in general. There is this asymmetry. I hope that answers your question. If not, let me know.
We also got a question from Barbara about, does house and roof color make a significant effect?
yes, you would like to have light colored paint on your house just to help on the energy balance. And what would be really effective on the roof would be a cool roof. You know, these are materials that reflect a lot more of the heat energy than say your typical asphalt shingle does. Actually, they're still made of fairly the base material of these shingles is common stuff. It's just on top of that there's this layer of a material that acts to reflect. And these kinds of shingles are not much. I think they're basically the same price as all other shingles. There may be people out there that know more about cool roofs than me, but I know that they are affordable and they do help with the energy balance. So Debbie Chambers is, no, that's a comment.
I think we're pretty caught up on the chat.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So Debbie Chambers is asking for about actual tradespeople, and Steve Mann is saying that EMU might give them a special training session. That would be terrific.
I did drop in the chat the free passive house tours that are happening June 28th and 29th.
Yes, yes. So if you're in the Sacramento area or down around Monterey, Carmel, or in the Los Angeles area, at least I know of those three areas, there's free passive house tours on next weekend, 28th and 29th of June, I believe. And you can just sign up at the link that was put in the chat, I guess, for these open houses, and then just so you get the addresses for them, and then you can go and just check them out and see what you think yourself of them. They're very nice houses. You know, it's nothing, kind of a fun tour. Here's another question, Lauren: is Passive House working with other environmental groups? Do you mean this coalition? If you mean this coalition, we are trying to build a coalition. I don't believe Interfaith Power and Light has joined the coalition yet, but that would be terrific if they would. We should reach out to them. There, yeah. So Megan just put in the chat the Passive House tours. Debbie's asking a question. What can we do after we've joined the coalition, the Passive House Coalition? Next steps locally and statewide. Well, so what we are planning to do, the next step of our campaign is we are going to be reaching out to legislators that we've already identified that we believe are sympathetic with climate action, and especially in the building sector. Many of them have already taken steps in this direction with pieces of legislation. So we are going to reach out to them. But so what that involves is contacting your local assembly member and state senator's office. And if you could do that, if you join our coalition and you can reach out to these offices and ask them if they would like some information about this campaign, about how effective it would be in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and making it a comfortable living space for people. It's kind of a win-win situation. We would be glad to give them a short tutorial or come in and talk with them. So that's next steps. We have to find a legislator that is willing to carry this bill, the bill we're proposing, next year when it comes up. So these bills get, they get put out on the table, so to speak, in November. So they're all there. This is what, they're going to vote on over the coming session. So we need to have, we want to be talking now, begin talks to try and identify these legislators. Some of those that we've identified are Josh Becker, Scott Wiener, Isaac Bryan, Senator Wahab, Alicia, I'm not sure, Aisha, I think, Aisha Wahab. These are some, and we're hoping that there are others that might be interested. Can we supply the template? Yes. If you we have such a template available. If you can drop me a I don't think it's we should it needs to put up on our website. We have it. I don't think it's up on our website. But if you want to just drop me your contact info, Debbie, then I can send you all this information, and that or if there's others, we will, and then we will be posting it on our website so that it's accessible for all.
Looks like Lauren raised her hand. Lauren, you want to go ahead?
Once again, Rob, this Climate Action California seems such a natural fit with CCL as a guest speaker at their annual conferences. I'm thinking of the one that I attended in Atherton just a few months back. There were incredibly dynamic and far-reaching speakers. I bet you are connected with them, but I'm asking formally if you are.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Would you be a speaker, or would Climate Action California be a speaker at
Lauren, maybe offline. Why don't you ask me that offline?
Okay, sure.
By all means, but yeah, we'll talk about that. But I just keep this more focused on today's agenda. Were there any more questions here? Can you? Oh, yes. Okay, I think I answered that. Is Passive House working with Third Act California? No, we're not. If you know of somebody in Third Act that would has the authority to maybe join our coalition, we could have them join our coalition. That would be terrific. Or we can just reach out and if there's someone there, someone that we can talk to about getting a scheduled presentation, that we could do that. We could do that too.
Megan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was going to mention that I'm a member of Third Act, and I can bring it up with some of my other third actors to see if they would like to do this. And are any other people on this call from Third Act?
So someone, I guess he's from Maryland. Okay, Maryland Third Act. That's Bill. Well, okay. So we'll just that's an option to pursue. Well, everyone. So the slides and the presentation itself, the webinar, there is a recording of this. that will be made available. And that's where there's other links that some of which we've already shared, but there are links in the at the end of the presentation also that might be of use. Although I think many of them we've already shared. Yes, are there? If you know, if I didn't answer a question clearly, if somebody has you know, please let me know if I can add any or be more specific if I wasn't. I know some of those questions, some of the ones I may have said too much and, you know, lost the answer in what I said. But okay, well, thanks all for joining. Thanks for all the questions.
Thanks for the presentation.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Rob, for doing this.
Okay. Well, just help us with the coalition. You know, please join us. Bring other people on board. Talk to your representatives, because that's how we're going to get people to carry a bill. I mean, that's really what this is all about. This is politics. It's what we have to make laws, and this is the best way forward, I think, to get this passed, is to bring it into law, and we need to have a big coalition, a diverse coalition to do that. So please help us and please join our coalition and talk to your friends and associates about it. Thank you.